got a half an hour to talk. Can you
Okay.
guys hear me? I'm seeing you've had trouble hearing me talk all the way through my brilliant speech, I see, but I'm going to turn my
But
video.
luckily it's been recorded, so we'll all be able to tune into that. I think Brian wanted to talk about school reopening, and I'm going to talk about the School Funding Commission work. Do you want to start, Brian, or?
Yeah. Sure. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Ken Street, for putting this together. Love that you put education first on the docket. But I think that says a lot about where this issue lies in across the state, and it was certainly a priority that we heard loud and clear from House Democrats this year, was that education and education funding was a top priority. I really want to thank Dave. I saw Mel, a lot of House Education Committee members on here for really, after some years in the darkness of being in the minority on the House Education Committee, really made their time in the majority worthwhile, and took a lot of really important steps to get us going in a better direction. I know Dave's going to talk a lot, as he said, about funding, but the budget that House Democrats and eventually the legislature put together was an important first step. So I just want to say thank you to all the House Dems that are on the call tonight, and for making education a priority, and for your leadership. So this year, pre-COVID-19, pre-pandemic, and post-pandemic, has been a lot about NEA New Hampshire. We have 17,000 members across the state. I'm sure we have someone. I know we have some on this call, maybe some retired members as well, and. But I think the theme of this year, 2020, has been about safety for NEA New Hampshire. And before the pandemic started, we were working with Dave, Mel, Senator Khan about what do we do about better improving the safety for educators and for students when we're faced with kids bringing trauma home from school and acting out violently in the classroom. We heard some heartbreaking stories of school assaults, and we put together with legislators, put together a study committee to look at that, and we're hoping I think next week that the governor will sign House Bill 1558, big omnibus bill, with a lot of important mental health components to it, but also to improve the safety and reporting around violent acts against educators when we're in person. And also really appreciate that the House passed, I think for the first time, gun-free school zones bill, also really important, and not surprisingly vetoed, but I think it's something that it was something we supported, and something that was that we hope we can finally see become law after this election. But then the pandemic hit, and now we're faced with a whole new set of safety concerns. And some of you, I'm sure many of you saw that the governor and commissioner of education, Frank Edelblut, released their return to school plan. Some of the backstory on that is that there was a task force that was formed, and for NEA New Hampshire, it was we were our president Megan Tuttle who you may have heard on the exchange this morning talking a little bit about this, was on one of the panels. But there was between the point where there was some broad themes laid out and the time that the actual report was released, there was a lot of work done in between. A lot of, because all of a sudden we went to kind of a 2-page outline of what a potential reopening could look like to a 56-page document that was probably mostly written internally. And I think the theme of this plan is that New Hampshire's done so well in stemming COVID-19, and this reopening plan feels like if this were a football game and we were at the 1-yard line and all of a sudden we fumbled it right at the goal line, because it really falls short on setting some important guidelines for reopening. It contained a lot of suggestions around health guidelines that for months we've been preached to are really important, that the CDC said important, that the American Academy of Pediatrics has said important, but then all of a sudden when we're talking about going back to school, well, that's where we can have flexibility, and that's where we can have, as the commissioner put it this morning on the exchange, we can be nimble. And there are a number of aspects to going back to school where I think it is important that there be local control, local decisions made. And right now, because the governor and commissioner have essentially kicked going back to school down to the school districts and said, you all figure it out. That's basically what they've done. Whether it comes to the health guidelines, a number of aspects in this plan, and then of course to the funding, they've sort of kicked it all down to the local level. The governor said in his press conference when he announced this that there's millions and millions of dollars for the school districts to use in going back to school. Of course, he didn't talk about the fact that the commissioner and Betsy DeVos wanted a lot of these school districts to escrow millions of dollars that they wanted to divert to private schools. But be that as it may, there are aspects certainly that should be made at the local level, but not when we're talking about health and safety. If we're talking about issues of how do we make the scheduling of a hybrid model work, that has been talked a lot about, that's an important one I think that needs to take place at the local level, especially when you're talking about teachers who in that kind of model, and when they stepped up for remote learning, all of a sudden went to a much longer, much extended day when we're talking about 12, 13 hour days. Laura Canoy talked a little bit about this this morning on the show. But how do we exist in that kind of model and not have educators burning out throughout the school year? So, but when it came to safety, everything was suggestions around looking at masks, suggestions around, do we have our HVAC systems cleaned or updated? I'm sure plenty of you have been in a school building in September when it's, the air quality in the building is not good. It's 90 degrees in the building, and the airflow in that is not moving around. And so, a situation like that, that's got to be a little bit more than just a suggested guideline. Something like that really needs to be a precondition for reopening, along with the masks and the distancing. And as I said before, this is something that you know, is going to require funding. The department, the governor should be not only requiring the masks, but also providing them for school districts as well, not just helping them purchase them on the open market. Right now, there are a lot of anxious educators out there. We had a call, Zoom like this, the day after the governor announced his plan, and just announcing it within 24 hours, we already had 400 people signed up. That was the sort of level of anxiety when you're everything from educators who are feeling nervous about, you know, their own situation if they're immunocompromised, to, you know, students who are potentially bringing, even if they're asymptomatic, bringing those, bringing COVID back to their families when they may have immunocompromised. And when we're in a situation where one school district may very well be doing it differently than another, if we have, you know, 100 different reopening plans, you know, you have educators with kids in other school districts. This is all connected. And so when it comes to the health and safety guidelines around this, there really needs to be more leadership coming from both the Department of Education and from the governor. And so there are plenty of other states that are, you know, they may not have perfect reopening plans, but they're certainly helping their cities and towns out a lot more than New Hampshire is. Last thing I'll say about the reopening is that, you know, nobody wants to go back to in-person educating more than teachers in New Hampshire. I mean, it was really hard for a lot of them, like it was for students, to end the school year the way it did, without having that in-person connection. And it certainly would be hard starting the year for people without that in-person connection. I think the beginning of the school year in particular, but we have to do it right. We have to do it safely. And so we haven't been out there saying, don't reopen schools. We've been saying, if you're going to do it safely and make sure you do it right. Because again, we don't want to have sacrificed all the people in New Hampshire have sacrificed for months and months and months, only to see all that progress turned backwards, like we've seen in some of these other states who have made premature reopening decisions. So tomorrow, Megan Tuttle, our president, will be making a presentation of the House and Senate Joint Education Committee meeting. So I'd urge all of you to listen into that if you haven't heard the show from this morning. And we are going to be talking about, and then tomorrow, and releasing a letter to the governor outlining some of these items that we think need to be required. But you know, some of them are the ones that I know a lot of you have been talking about, you know, since we've talked about reopening, which is we need to have the mask wearing, we need to have the social distancing, we need to have air quality and HVAC systems in our school. We need to have those working well when we're not in a pandemic. And we definitely need them when we're talking about, you know, a disease that moves from person to person the way it does. So I'll close by saying, whether it's some of the issues that I talked about pre-pandemic, related to in-person mental health, safety of in-person education, or the issues we're talking about now, eventually they all circle back to funding. And when I said at the beginning that the legislature took an important step in this year's budget that they stood up to the governor on. And we're really looking forward to continuing to support the work that the School Funding Commission that was created in there is starting to do. And I guess I'll kick it over to Dave. And then we do questions at the end, or? Oh.
We'll mix them all up at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll do it at the end. And go ahead, Dave. Great.
Sounds good.
Thank you,
Sounds
Brian.
good. Brian, that was a great job, and it's a lot to address in 10-15 minutes. But I think you stated it really well. The Sununu and Edelblut have basically punted this entire issue back to the school districts. A guideline is not a plan. I think there might be one shall in that entire 56 pages, and it really leaves it up to the districts are on their own. They're on their own to establish policies, and they're on their own to pay for it. Why would we expect anything else from this crew? That's what they expect with everything else in public education too. And I know there's a lot of members of the House Education Committee with us this evening, and they saw it firsthand. You know, right from day one when Mel Myler called the commissioner in to talk about public education, he didn't even want to talk about funding, not even on his radar, not something he wants to have anything to do with, and he has shown that same level of interest when it comes to the work of the School Funding Commission, unfortunately. Fortunately, though, I don't think that's necessarily a prevailing sentiment within the Department of Education. They have some extraordinary people to work within the department. I think Brian would agree with me over there as well. And they have been very engaged in our work. So let me just sort of take a quick flyover of what we've been doing here, what the commission is. But basically, the commission was established in the FY20 FY21 budget, which was signed into law back in September 2019, and you know, like all budgets, well, like this budget, it was very much a compromise budget. But everything that went into establishing the school funding, or the commission to study school funding, basically came out in its entirety from a bill as proposed by the House Education Chair Mel Myler. And I got to tell you, it's a fantastic piece of work. It's something the state's never really embarked on in this way before. And it was part of a very, I think, well planned out three-phase approach to dealing with the education funding crisis that we're all familiar with. By the way, and the reason we're familiar with it is because you know, during campaigns we knock on doors. I know we're not going to be able to do that so much this summer and this fall, but when we're out there knocking on doors, I mean, it's the first thing you hear. What are you doing about school funding? What are you doing about my property taxes? It's on everybody's mind. And it's not to say there aren't other important issues. There are, but this is a hugely important issue. And as Brian mentioned, it was by far the #1 issue in the House Democratic Caucus when we looked at what we wanted to focus on this year. So the three phases to school funding are really, what could we do immediately? What could we do in the school year that just wrapped up, FY19? And what the budget that was signed into law did was restore what's called stabilization, which is critical money that was taken away from a number of school districts in the prior funding model that has been eroding away at 4% a year, and has cost districts like Berlin, I think it's costing them something like an additional $50,000 or $60,000 every year, and it's an enormous burden on that property tax base. So what we did for FY19 is fully restore stabilization. So it's not a great plan, but at least it helps. It helps shore up the dam. It helps fix the leak that these districts, and that's $35 million. And we also did that in the second year of the budget, so that was in the FY20 budget. We also did it in the FY21 budget, and in addition to, and this is the second phase of school funding improvement, is to add another almost $65 million in combination of fiscal disparity and enhanced aid based on free and reduced lunch population. And both those things are very, very important because of the heavy reliance on local property taxes to fund schools. Because of that, we see some school districts like Berlin paying nearly, and I'm exaggerating a little bit, but paying nearly $50 per thousand in property taxes, and other districts like Newcastle paying closer to $5 per thousand. So almost a factor of 10 difference. So it's almost like a $2 million home in Newcastle pays the same amount in real dollars as a $200,000 home in Berlin or Claremont. So go figure. That's a tough one to try to justify. And so that's really what led up to the third point in school funding, which is establishing the School Funding Commission. And so I'll tell you a little bit about the commission. It's got 16 members. It includes 6 legislators, 4 from the House and 2 from the Senate. And it's got 10 public members on it as well, who were selected by the President of the Senate, Speaker of the House, the Governor, and the chair. And I'm chairing the commission, so I had a few picks in that. And I got to say, it's a really bipartisan commission, and that's important, because the work we do and ultimately the recommendations we make have to be bipartisan, and they have to survive, the ebbs and flows of majorities, the changes in the governor's office. And I have my favorites. I know who I want to see in the governor's office next year, but you don't always get what you want. But we do need stability and reliability and fairness in our school funding plan, and it needs to be something that doesn't just face whiplash anytime there's a change in the legislature or a change in the corner office. So typically the commission meets on Mondays at 2 o'clock. We just finished up a meeting a couple hours ago, and we've been meeting really steadily since the middle of January, when the pandemic broke in middle of March. We probably missed 6 weeks of non-full commission meetings, and while we sort of worked out our the remote meeting plan and the protocols behind that, but since then, not only does the full commission typically meet on Mondays, but we've also broken into work groups, which typically meet another day of the week, usually sometimes on a Thursday, sometimes on a Friday. And these work groups are doing everything from looking at how to establish a true cost and distribution plan for state funds to support public education, but also what are the fiscal policy impacts behind that? Where's the money going to come from? And we don't have a whole lot of revenue sources here in New Hampshire. It's pretty much the property tax right now. and without other broad-based taxes, you know, the limited remaining state funds come from business taxes, rooms and meals taxes, and things like that. So, and then the third work group is chaired by Mel Myler, and he likes to talk about it as the second rail of what we're doing here, and it's called the Public Engagement Work Group, and its purpose is to keep the public moving along with the progress that the commission is making, but also keep the commission informed of what constituencies across the state, whether they're educators, whether they're taxpayers, whether they're community leaders, how they feel about education funding and the policies that and challenges that we talk about as we you know, as we move through this work. So so at the end of the day, this is going to be about a year's worth of work, and I hate to even come up with the total number of hours that in the end we will have put into this. We've brought on board for this effort the Carsey School of Public Policy, headed by Bruce Mallory, and they've been extraordinary partners in helping to provide the commission with organization, with scheduling, with sort of framing up reports and you know, what sort of order we want to tackle information during our meetings. Together we developed a request for a proposal for a national consulting firm to help us with the adequacy costing study, and we've done that, and they are on board now as well. And this is also an extraordinary group of people who've worked with a number of different states, including some of our neighbors, and including some states in the Midwest and out west, and just bring an extraordinary level of experience to a very complicated problem, and which is, you know, what's a cost of an adequate education, and they're one of the things that I think attracted the bipartisan commission to them is that not only are they looking at inputs, but they're looking at outcomes as well. And I think we all recognize that at the end of the day, it's the outcomes that help determine whether we've done a reasonable job at providing every student with an opportunity for an adequate education. And so, with those two things, equitable opportunities to an adequate education, and doing it in a way that provides tax equity across the state, so we don't have the $200,000 home in Claremont paying the same amount of dollars as the $2 million home in Newcastle. I think we can get there. And the commission's looking to release its final report by December 1st. That's a really important date because the new legislature gets sworn in on December 2nd. So we want to have that. Done. And I think we realistically want that report to be useful to everybody involved in the policy writing work. So the governor's office, the Senate, and the House, and people on both sides of the aisle. And we want them to be informed by the work of the commission. They might not, all of them may not adopt final recommendations made by the commission, but we hope they'll understand and any proposals that they put forward, you know, consider both equitable access to educational outcomes and tax equity across the state. Let's see. I don't know if I've got screen sharing on, Rob. I do have screen sharing. I just wanted to pop this up real quick, and this is the School Funding Commission's website. So Carsey, carsey.unh.edu/school-funding, and there's a tremendous amount of resources, and I mean, I could literally talk all day about this, and to some extent, I feel like I probably have. But if you go to sources and background, let's see if my internet's cooperating. It's a little sluggish, but you have commission reports, research vendor documents. This is a very important section right here, and I'd suggest anybody that's running for local office or running for legislative offices or other offices at the state level, take a look at these briefs. These were prepared by our consultants, and you know, a couple of them here I think really do drop out as being really strong primers. Adequate funding through equitable taxation, and setting out goals and standards, but they all costing out inadequate education, evaluating finance, school finance systems. They're all very interesting. They're all 5 or 6 pages long, big type. So you know, you can get you really can get through them, and I think they've helped to inform the commission, you know, very much. And it's been a tremendous learning experience for me, and I think for you know, hopefully for many members of the commission as well. So Brian, you mentioned the joint committees on House Senate committees on education. I'll be meeting tomorrow at 9 o'clock. The link is in the House calendar. It's in the legislative calendar. So so anybody that's got time to want to tune into that, I think particularly for all people seeking elected office, that will be a very informative hearing where we'll hear from not only the commissioner, but we'll hear from education experts, from administrators, teachers, nurses, special education, safety, and you'll be able to hopefully develop some ideas in terms of how you want to go about reflecting that in you know, when you're talking with voters and constituents. So Rob, should Brian and I take some questions?
I've got a couple here. Maybe easier if we just reel them off so we can read them. Representative Doherty has a question about a clearinghouse where districts can share their reopening plans so they can learn what each other are doing and perhaps improve what they have done. Is there any thought of that?
That sounds like a comment. I think that's a great comment. You know,
you can put him in charge of it.
Yeah, Dave, where are you? I love it. Yeah, let's you know, we'll take that offline and see how we might be able to host that. I mean, I'm really hoping the department will really step up in its you know, in putting together a plan so that we're not having to rely on districts and districts sharing each other's plans and trying to come up with things independently. But I think absent a plan from the state, then we should definitely be doing that.
Yeah, that's a good
Brian,
thought.
Go ahead, Brian.
Oh, I was just going to say earlier in when the school building shutdowns happened, and we initially went to remote learning. You know, I think there were a lot of school administrators and educators who are looking for some kind of additional. How do I manage week to week? And it was actually the NEA. School administrators, school boards associations all came together and issued a letter that gave some additional guidance like that, some best practices on, you know, giving a day for, you know, regrouping and professional development work during the week to sort of reassess, because we were sort of going week to week. without a whole lot of direction. And that, a lot of districts really appreciated getting that. I know a lot of superintendents down to paraeducators, it was good to have that. So I think the clearinghouse is a good idea, especially if we're not going to get that leadership from the state.
Yeah.
Brian, Representative Mullen has a question for you, whether the NEA will be addressing the possibility of workman's comp for staff that need to be out of school because of quarantining.
Sure. So I'll give a spoiler alert. One of the things we're going to talk about tomorrow is early on when one of the governor's emergency orders was to have the presumptive standard for workers' comp for some of our first responders, which was the right thing to do, because they don't have a choice whether they're going in or not. The governor's saying we're going back to school. Well, I think it would go a long way if that was extended to school employees.
For both of you, I don't know who wants to answer, but Wendy Thomas asked a real, I would assume, a pressing issue about teachers who will be taking early retirement and substitutes, saying that's not worth it. How are we going to handle our teacher shortage?
I'll start with, we have been hearing that. I think, there are, one of the things about our teacher population, similar to the New Hampshire population, is, we have, I think, at least 40% of our educators who are, over the age of 50, many of who can retire. So not only are they many of them in sort of a COVID high risk health category, but they have the years to be able to retire. And the governor said something about, well, in response to the question, aren't we going to need more substitutes then? And I think I saw it in the chat box earlier, is how many substitutes are going to go into a school district? They're not 100% sure everything's been done to keep people safe for $65 a day. Just not going to happen. We already had a substitute shortage pre-pandemic, and we've already heard that happening right now with school districts going out to try and secure longer term subs in order to accommodate for, if they need to go to some kind of hybrid model. I've heard a lot of districts already getting a lot of no's, saying I'm not doing it.
No, that's absolutely right, and I think this also is a clear example of the disparities that we see across districts. Some districts are going to be able to weather this much better. If you're only taxing your residents $5 per thousand, you got some runway there to work it. Other districts, the governor likes to use the word flexibility. Talk with the mayor up in Berlin about how much flexibility he has, or the superintendent in Berlin, who both wore out sets of tires driving down to the LOB so many times last year to testify on school funding issues. They have no flexibility. So I don't know where they're going to find subs or pay for them.
Connie Lane has a question, and also Dave asked a little bit about this. Why is the governor not using a portion of the $1.25 billion that we got from the feds? And Representative Doherty says he gave Edelblut $42 million to spend wherever he wants. You want to comment on that?
I don't have an answer to that, and I think the little bit of guidance that came from the feds was that it's not supposed to be used for backfilling revenue shortfalls, but they certainly could put it towards additional programs to provide some relief to districts. So I have zero explanation.
Yeah, just to add to that, CARES Act money, a lot of school districts started using that money and counting that money that they were going to get reimbursed for from CARES Well, first of all, it took a long time for them to get it to begin with. Yeah, but a lot of that money's been used, getting technology that they didn't have before. And so to say that money is, available, the K through 12 money from the CARES Act, I think very, very uncertain, and certainly not enough for what districts are going to face if they're really going to do this safely. I had one member tell me there was their HVAC system, they got an estimate on replacing it, needs to be replaced, costs over $1 million to do it, so I think the answer here really is Congress needs to step up and pass the HEROES Act, and Governor Sununu really needs to step up and call for that, not just sort of sit there and wait for Mitch McConnell to get his act together and start feeling the pressure. If the president wants people going back to school, they need to put their money where their mouth is and start helping these school districts.
There have been a lot of questions about the Carsey report that Dave had, and I just point out that there is a link to it that's posted in the chat box by Ellen Marie Douglas. So if any of you want that, that's there. I can also send it out again tomorrow to everybody that participated today. I don't suppose we got time to get into the tax question because that would be another 4 hours. But
I got time.
Dave Hennessy has asked, is there money for training, particularly on online learning training for first year and substitute teachers? And that can be our last question for either of you.
So if there is, it would be coming from the CARES Act, because schools have already set their budgets. I mean, I think most schools have already set their budgets. Hawkins is actually one that hasn't set its budget right now. But Brian, what are you hearing on that?
I'm sorry, I was putting my contact info in the chat room.
on training for remote instruction.
One of the suggestions in the reopening was to have 3 personal development days to do, which that idea in and of itself is a good one. I think there is going to need to be time for both professional development, also just time for educators and the school district to be able to talk to parents and students about the importance of, some of the responsibility they're going to need to take, whether it's wearing the mask, the social distancing, the things that they're going to need to do themselves. So, and I know a number of school districts are going back to, if they're going back to classroom learning, they're going to do it several days ahead of, beyond where they would normally start, so that they can accommodate to do some of those things.
Okay, everybody, thank you all so much. Next Monday, the same time, we'll be discussing the environment with Howie Moffett, who is the vice chair of the Technology and Energy, Science, Technology and Energy Commission, and Rob Werner from the League of Conservation Voters. And thank you so much to Dave and Brian and all of you for attending, and we'll see you next week this time.
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Rob. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.